I'm going to show you a list of the top 20 donors, political donors, to candidates in the United States this current election cycle. It's a list of the very, very rich people who donate more money than anybody else to political candidates. The top political contributor in the U.S. is Democratic donor George Soros. You probably recognize his name. He's the person your crazy uncle who watches Fox News all day blames every time the sun goes down at night or he doesn't win the Powerball again. Darn you, Soros! Despite the prominence of George Soros on the list, the majority of the rest of these donors are actually people who donate to Republicans, like Trump mega donors Larry Ellison and Peter Thiel, who says it's such a drag that women were ever allowed to vote. Things would definitely be better for Peter if that hadn't happened. But there are a handful of other Democratic donors on the list, including Reid Hoffman, who's founder of the website LinkedIn. Reid Hoffman is now one of the top donors to Democratic campaigns in the country in this cycle. And now this is the lead from the Washington Post today in terms of what to watch out for in donations in the next cycle. Look at this. Quote, LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman, one of the nation's top political donors, gathered more than a dozen billionaires or their representatives over Zoom on Friday to sound an alarm about the coming elections. Hoffman was pitching some of the nation's wealthiest people on a doomsday idea that has become a growing obsession. One slide of the PowerPoint presentation that Hoffman gave to the group said, quote, MAGA, Make America Great Again leaders, intend to use the 2022 midterms to install Trump in 2024, regardless of the vote. A second slide, titled How MAGA Midterms Can Install Trump, laid out a step-by-step doomsday hypothetical scenario. Republicans win statewide offices in key battleground states this year in 2022. Then they change state laws in 2023 to give legislatures control over presidential electors. This new group of billionaires for democracy is called Investing in U.S. The Washington Post points out that they are one of the most aggressive groups of big dollar donors invested in pushing back against what they see as a Republican plan to essentially unknit the sweater of American democracy so that Republicans just choose the next president regardless of how Americans vote. Joining us now is Michael Shearer. He's national political reporter for the Washington Post who broke this story today. Mr. Shearer, thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.
You wrote about a number of different donor groups and some of their priorities and what they're spending on today. I'm focused in on this bit of your reporting related to Reid Hoffman and his efforts because I feel like that doomsday scenario that he's describing to billionaire donors is a thing that a lot of people on the left and in the center and even sort of just not Trumpy Republicans have been talking about as an inevitability for the country ahead of 2024. It sounds like there is a lot of overlap between the elite donor conversation here and the kind of word on the street for people who care about politics. Do you get the sense that that's fair?
Yeah, and I think I was surprised reporting this story how broad that concern is among the donor community. I focused on Reid's presentation because it was so recent and so stark. But really, if you go through all the big donor groups on the Democratic side, and these are mostly groups that pool donations for nonprofits. So a lot of this is not recorded in the lists of political donations. These are, lots of organizations that don't have to report where they're getting their money. This theme that the 2022 elections could determine the 2024 elections has really become a dominant one. And so what you have is a narrowing and a shifting of where they're focusing their money. Instead of focusing just on the House map or just on the Senate map, which is sort of typically what you do in a midterm election, they're focused narrowly on 5 to 7 states where there's governor's races, where there's state Supreme Court races, Secretary of State races. And they're really trying to win in those places to basically prevent Republicans from getting trifecta controlling both the legislative houses and the governorship so that they could change the laws either for voting, the rules of voting, or changing how electors are awarded.
And Michael, is there also effectively sort of a public education component to this, too, beyond funding individual candidates or even ballot measures? I mean, the way that you said they spelled this out in the call, this step-by-step hypothetical nightmare scenario, Republicans win statewide offices in key battleground states this year. Next year, they change state laws to give legislatures control over presidential electors. And then in the next presidential election in 2024, those state legislatures declare votes from urban centers to be tainted, and they decide they will overrule the popular vote in their states by sending their own state of electors to Washington. I mean, that prospect if there's a public education component to that, sort of telling people that that's the plan that they are investing against, potentially has the impact of inoculating the public against that kind of a scheme.
I think that's true, and that's true with some constituencies. What's interesting is a lot of this money, though, will not go to spread that message. So, for instance, in Pennsylvania, there's a $6 million effort that's been announced, part of one of these funding groups' efforts to educate people about Doug Mastriano, the Republican gubernatorial candidate. Most of that advertising campaign, door-knocking campaign is going to be about issues like abortion, minimum wage, unions, other issues than democracy, because they have found through their research, these groups, that those are the issues that will move voters. And that's really what this is about, moving voters, getting voters to vote who wouldn't otherwise vote, persuading voters, or in the case of Reid Hoffman's group, dissuading Republicans from voting Republican. So I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of education around this, but in a lot of cases, it won't be the primary thing. And I think a lot of voters who are getting messages from these groups won't know the underlying idea behind the money being spent, which is to try and protect the 2024 democratic process. Except
for the fact that you're letting the cat out of the bag with this excellent reporting, which has its own excellent public education component to it. Michael Shearer, national political reporter for The Washington Post. Sir, thank you for joining us. Well done.
Thank you so much for having me.